But first tonight, to a big exclusive. You've heard today that Scott Morrison is quitting politics, but his role has been kept under wraps until now. I can exclusively reveal that Morrison will be joining leading Trump administration figures at two separate companies. My US sources tell me that Morrison will be working with former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo at a defence VC company. Mike Pompeo, as you know, is the former head of the CIA, and he announced that he was joining DYNE Maritime earlier this month. It's a new Australian-founded, US-based venture capital company that invests in technologies related to the AUKUS military intelligence sharing pact. Scott Morrison and Mike Pompeo became good friends during their time in politics, with common ground, both when it comes to their passion for national security, their concern about Chinese Communist Party, and their deep personal faith. Then, in a separate move, Scott Morrison would join Donald Trump's former National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien at the firm he co-founded and is chairman of, American Global Strategies. Now, over the past couple of years, I've interviewed on multiple occasions both Robert O'Brien and Mike Pompeo. They are highly impressive figures, and Scott Morrison will undoubtedly make his mark in the defence and intelligence space. And you've got to stick with us on Sky News tonight, because Scott Morrison is going to be on with Paul Murray right after my show for an exclusive interview, so don't go anywhere. Now, when he takes up these roles, Morrison will still be based in Sydney in the Sutherland Shire, but it's likely he'll be travelling overseas. And it's important to note that his roles, both working closely with Mike Pompeo and Robert O'Brien, well, they played key roles in Trump's presidency. And this will be immensely helpful if Trump does return to the White House, as it's looking increasingly likely. This is quite a telling contrast. Scott Morrison's excellent relationship with key US figures, while Albanese will struggle if the Republicans, and especially Trump, win at the next election. Donald Trump famously rolled out the red carpet for Scott Morrison and his wife Jenny at the White House, an honour only reserved for his closest political allies. Albanese, meanwhile, is said to be getting quite worried about a Trump comeback and how this will impact on his chance of a second term in office. Albanese has said publicly that he'd like to serve a full term, which would take him to an election date close to May next year. But Labor figures are now discussing how Trump's likely, perhaps inevitable return to the presidency could impact on Albanese. Trump has won the caucuses in Iowa. His rivals are dropping like flies. Ron DeSantis, just the latest. And it looks like he will be the next president if he's up against Joe Biden. Recent polls show Biden's approval ratings are falling. If Trump wins this November, his inauguration would be at the end of January, which means the first few months of his presidency would overlap with Albanese as Prime Minister. Just how Donald Trump would react to the socialist left Labor government we've got at the moment is unpredictable. There's the risk of Trump blasting Albanese over issues such as not supporting the US in the Red Sea, an issue that has no doubt frustrated the Biden administration. Or there's the risk of friction related to AUKUS. Trump could even tear up the security deal if Albanese rejects yet another American overture for military support against Iran. Well, how would this all look for Labor when Australia's closest and most important ally comes down hard on Albanese and Penny Wong? This is why Albanese may not want to risk those volatile months, and some are encouraging him to consider heading to the polls later this year. There's speculation that interest rates may have started to come down by then. And remember, it's far from a given that Albanese will win the next election. Tony Abbott, Scott Morrison, Malcolm Turnbull, Kevin Rudd, Julia Gillard, each only won one election. Our last Prime Minister to win more than one election was John Howard, and As you know, he left office in 2007. Well, I can also tonight reveal leaked polling that is concerning for Albanese. A new poll conducted for the Liberal Party in November in Peter Dutton's seat of Dickson had Labor's primary vote at 26%. Albanese's net favourability rating was at -26. Now, at the last federal election, Labor's primary vote in Dickson was 31%. So that's a fall of 5 points. This polling also showed that there was a swing to the LNP on primary and two-party preferred. Now, this was a single-seat poll by Freshwater. It was a one-off to test the waters in Queensland and in the opposition leader's seat, which is technically considered marginal. Of course, Queensland usually is a better state for the coalition, but as I said, this is a marginal seat, and to have Labor's primary vote in the mid-20s shows just why Albanese is so worried. What we are seeing now is a Prime Minister under pressure. It explains why he's done 50 media interviews in a month and why he's hauling his politicians back to Canberra to talk about the cost of living. Given how poorly Albanese is going at the moment, and has been, if you look at it, since mid-last year, his political credibility is eroding fast. Positioned on the far left of the Labor Party, cocooned in the inner city area of Marrickville in Sydney, his political instincts aren't naturally in tune with Middle Australia. He's been slow to realise that it's the cost of living that matters most to Australians. And he learned that the hard way when Australia voted hell no to the voice, as Paul Murray so eloquently puts it. Voters were saying no to Albanese's agenda and his priorities, which haven't been in sync with what Australians are going through. Only now is the Prime Minister trying to get things back on track. But if he thinks breaking an election promise is going to help him climb out of a political hole, well, he's mistaken. Once a leader has lost the trust of the electorate, it's gone forever. Julia Gillard never recovered from this moment.
There will be no carbon tax under the government I lead.
As a nation, we need to put a price on carbon and create a clean energy future.
And now Albanese is being accused of his own major broken promise on the Stage 3 tax cuts. Before the election, he promised they would go ahead, and now he's not going to commit to them if you earn over $150,000.
They've been legislated. We support them.
Can you promise to those Australian families the Stage 3 tax cuts will come into effect in July in full?
Well, we haven't changed our position on that, Michael.
I'll ask that question again. Can you promise, as you did before the election, the Stage 3 tax cuts will come in full in July?
Well, I've said we haven't changed our position, Michael,
can you promise, Prime Minister?
Well, I've said I can't be clearer than that. We haven't changed our position.
That's not exactly a promise, PM.
Tax cuts.
It was a promise before the election. Has that promise changed?
Yeah, you can play word games, Michael. Nothing has changed.
I support tax cuts, and everyone will be getting a tax cut.
Me too. Will I get one?
You will always be looked after, Kyle.
And so the breaking news tonight is that anyone earning over $150,000 will not receive a tax cut. Anyone over $150,000, because that's what Labor considers the top end of town. They think that anyone earning that amount of money does not deserve a tax cut. They don't mind breaking the election promise for anyone earning over $150,000. Now, whether or not you agree with everyone getting tax cuts, it's unquestionably a broken promise, and as you can expect, it's gone down like a lead balloon.
If you want to retain that sort of flexibility, then you shouldn't go to the elections with those sorts of promises. And there's also a strong argument that people plan their financial affairs and rely to a degree of certainty upon government policy, and that's why these tax cuts were legislated. I mean, they've been modelled into the budget, their fiscal and economic and macroeconomic consequences.
If that is what the Prime Minister does, he is breaking an election commitment.
Moving away from any aspect of the Stage 3 tax cuts would be the mother of all broken promises.
Well, this isn't the first broken promise from Albanese. First, the Prime Minister promised there'd be no changes to superannuation, but then increased the tax rate on accounts over $3 million. He promised a $275 cut to power prices, but electricity has gone up by 23% or even more in some states. There was the promise there'd be no changes to franking credits, but then Labor removed franking credits connected to capital raising and share buybacks. Labor promised higher real wages and cheaper mortgages. As you know, neither of those things have eventuated. They promised a 24/7 registered nurse in every aged care home. This still hasn't been fulfilled. Albanese promised industrial relations bargaining would not be industry-wide, but yet that is what we're seeing. This all gives the Liberals a lot of material to work with ahead of the next election, and they've already released an ad in the last 24 hours related to the Stage 3 tax cuts. And now, the Stage 3 tax cuts add to the broken promises list. They're already legislated, so Labor will have to go back to the Parliament and change the legislation in order to break this promise. A broken promise matters when it comes to people's pay packets, when they've planned their financial affairs for their family based on the tax changes. There's no question Middle Australia is shouldering the burden of our tax system, with around half of their salary going straight to government coffers. And then you think, with all this tax that Australians are paying, Labor has given $46.5 million to the Gaza Strip and to Palestinians, and Israel is clearly worried that this money will go to fund terrorism, as government official Elon Levy told me on this program last night.
But we have a problem that Hamas is hijacking aid, and the international agencies that are supposed to be looking out for civilians in Gaza have absolutely nothing to say about that. And we think it's very important that there be international accountability, that the money that you are sending for civilians genuinely reach civilians and not be appropriated and hijacked by terrorists instead.